The decisive moment occurred precisely at 11:47 inches the morning, exactly 17 minutes into her line of questioning, marking the instant Ilhan Omar comprehended that she had committed a devastating and catastrophic error. FBI Director Kash Patel sat opposite her, his hands calmly clasped atop a crimson file folder, his demeanor tranquil and almost serene, resembling a man who had just revealed an unbeatable poker hand and was merely waiting for the rest of the table to realize the game had concluded. Omar was leaned forward, her phone pressed tightly against her ear, while her attorney whispered fervently beside her. Around them, the House Oversight Committee hearing chamber had fallen into absolute stillness, not the polite quiet of attentive listening, but the frozen, suffocating silence of collective astonishment. 47 million individuals were watching the broadcast live across every major network. C-SPAN's servers were buckling under the immense digital load, and Twitter had crashed twice within the last 10 minutes, yet none of that seemed to matter in this frozen second, because everyone present in that room and everyone watching from home could clearly see the realization written across Ilhan Omar's face. This scenario was never supposed to unfold in this manner. She was intended to be the prosecutor. She was the one meant to interrogate Kash Patel on national television regarding his alleged political crusades against progressive members of Congress. Yet, instead, she found herself as the one unable to provide answers. However, to fully understand how we arrived at this juncture, at this moment where a congresswoman's professional career was imploding in real time, we must rewind the clock, though not very far, merely 17 minutes prior. Chairman Mike Johnson struck the gavel 3 times, the sharp sound echoing through the ornate chamber, declaring that this hearing of the House Oversight Committee was now in session to address concerns raised by several members regarding the practices of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and allegations of politically motivated investigations targeting incumbent members of Congress. He looked down toward Kash Patel, who was seated alone at the witness table with no handlers and no public relations team, accompanied only by himself, a leather portfolio, and a glass of water. Director Patel, thank you for appearing voluntarily today, Johnson stated. Kash adjusted his microphone and replied, Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am happy to answer any questions the committee has. His voice steady and professional, the tone of someone who had endured 1,000 such hearings and understood precisely how the mechanics of them functioned. Ilhan Omar leaned into her own microphone, dressed in a bold purple hijab and a tailored black suit, her eyes sharp and confident, for this was the moment she had been preparing for over the course of weeks. Director Patel, her voice sliced through the room with razor-sharp precision, I am going to get straight to the point, because the American people deserve straightforward answers. She paused effectively, allowing the cameras to capture her expression before continuing. Over the past 6 months, multiple progressive members of Congress have reported being followed, having their communications monitored, and being subjected to what can only be described as harassment by federal law enforcement. Furthermore, this committee has received multiple whistleblower reports, credible reports suggesting that the FBI is maintaining active surveillance operations on at least a dozen sitting members of Congress. The room buzzed with energy as journalists leaned forward, recognizing this was the soundbite they had come to capture. Omar's voice rose slightly in intensity as she continued, These aren't random members, Director. They are progressives. They are Muslims. They are people of color. They are members who dare to speak truth to power, who criticize American foreign policy, and who demand accountability from institutions like yours. She locked eyes with Kash and delivered her ultimatum. So, let me start with a simple question. Yes or no? Is the FBI currently investigating any sitting member of Congress? Kash did not hesitate, nor did he look away, answering simply, Yes, Congresswoman. The room erupted with audible gasps, photographers' cameras clicking rapidly, like machine gun fire, and a Republican in the back row actually exclaimed a curse word loud enough for the microphone to catch it. Omar's lips curled into a slight, triumphant smile, believing she had him exactly where she wanted him, having secured an admission on live television that the FBI was indeed investigating members of Congress. And how many of those investigations target Muslim or progressive members? She pressed. Some of the individuals under investigation identify as progressive, Kash stated calmly, and some identify as Muslim. But Congresswoman, I need to clarify something important. Yes or no answers, Director. Omar cut him off, her voice sharp and commanding. This is exactly what we feared. Political persecution disguised as law enforcement. You are targeting members who speak truth to power, who criticize. Congresswoman, Kash's voice cut through her monologue like a scalpel. Not loud or aggressive, but firm. You asked for yes or no, and I gave you yes. But context matters in law. May I provide it? Omar waved her hand dismissively, stating, You can provide it after you answer my questions. Director, have you personally authorized surveillance on any member of this committee? Behind the scenes in the gallery, 3 rows back, Omar's lawyer was shaking his head frantically, mouthing, No, 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 don't ask that. Don't open that door. But Omar did not see him as she was riding high on the success of her opening, confident she had cornered the FBI director on national television. This was her mistake. Not the question itself, but the arrogance behind it. She was so certain she was the prosecutor that she failed to see she had just walked into her own trial. Kash took a slow breath and replied, Congresswoman, I don't personally authorize individual surveillances, but I do review and approve investigation recommendations from field offices when they meet probable cause standards established by federal law. So, to answer your question, if a member of this committee is under investigation, it is because career FBI agents, not political appointees, found evidence of potential federal crimes serious enough to warrant one. Omar scoffed, the sound of her derision caught by her microphone and broadcast to 47 million viewers. Potential federal crimes. That is a very convenient phrase. Director, care to elaborate on what crimes you are accusing sitting members of Congress of committing? The room fell very quiet, and even the journalists stopped typing. Kash looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was measured and almost gentle. Congresswoman, are you sure you want me to answer that question in open session on live television? This was the warning, the final exit ramp, and her lawyer was half out of his seat now, trying desperately to catch her eye. But Omar's pride would not let her back down, not in front of the cameras, and not with the entire progressive movement watching. She had come here to destroy Kash Patel's credibility, and she could not show weakness now. Director Patel, I asked you a direct question. What crimes are you accusing members of Congress of? Kash held her gaze for another beat. Then he nodded slowly, like a man who had just been given permission to do something he had been reluctant to do, but was now fully committed to. I haven't accused anyone, Congresswoman, but since you are asking for specifics in open session, he signaled to an aide standing by the wall. Let's talk about the evidence. The aide moved quickly, distributing sealed folders to every committee member, red covers, looking official, each one stamped with Cleared for Public Session, OGC, approved in black ink. The room erupted into controlled chaos as members frantically opened folders, Republicans' jaws dropping as they scanned the first page, while Democrats speed-read, looking for the trap they knew must be there somewhere. Omar's hands were shaking slightly as she broke the seal on hers. Just slightly. But the C-SPAN cameras caught the tremor. Kash waited patiently while they read, his hands remaining folded on the table and his expression remaining neutral. He looked like a professor waiting for students to finish a pop quiz. What you are looking at, he said finally, his voice cutting through the rustling paper, are redacted summaries of 3 ongoing FBI investigations into campaign finance violations wire fraud, and potential Foreign Agents Registration Act violations involving current House members. These summaries have been cleared by the Department of Justice, Office of Legal Counsel, and the Office of Government Ethics, specifically for this hearing. Omar looked up from her folder, her eyes wide. This is highly irregular. You can't just distribute active investigation files to Congresswoman. Cash's voice was sharp now, not angry but precise, like a surgeon making an incision. You called this hearing. You demanded transparency about FBI investigations into members of Congress. You summoned me here to answer questions about those investigations, and I am providing exactly the transparency you demanded. He paused to let that sink in. Or would you prefer we discuss this in closed session? I am happy to reconvene in a skiff if you would like. Just say the word. She was trapped, and everyone watching knew it. If she demanded a closed session now, she would look like she was hiding something. But if she continued, she had no idea what was coming. Her pride made the choice for her. I have nothing to hide, Director. Her voice was defensive now. The confidence from 5 minutes ago already evaporating. Let's continue right here. But I want to be clear. This seems like a coordinated attack on Congresswoman. May I ask you a question? Omar blinked. This is my question time, Director. Of course, then let me answer your original question more specifically. Kash opened his own red folder. You asked what crimes we are investigating when it involves members of Congress. Let me start with Case File 2021, DC 4478. He looked down at the page, then back up at her. It involves $7 million in campaign expenditures paid to a consulting firm owned by an individual with whom the candidate allegedly had an undisclosed personal relationship during the period of payment. The investigation began after a formal complaint filed by the National Legal and Policy Center in March 2020, alleging that campaign funds were used for personal expenses in violation of Federal Election Commission regulations and potentially constituting wire fraud under federal statute. The room had gone completely silent, to the point where you could hear the air conditioning humming. Omar's face had gone pale. Director, are you discussing my campaign? Kash looked at her with something that might have been sympathy, or might have been the cold calculation of a chess player who just declared checkmate. Congresswoman, you asked what crimes we investigate when it involves sitting members of Congress, and I am giving you a specific example. If the details sound familiar, that is because they are drawn from public FEC complaints, financial disclosures, and documents obtained through lawful investigative process. Republican Jim Jordan leaned into his microphone. Director Patel, to clarify for the record, is Congresswoman Omar currently under FBI investigation? Kash didn't take his eyes off Omar. Congressman Jordan, I cannot confirm or deny the identity of specific subjects in ongoing investigations without DOJ approval. What I can say is that Case File 2021D-C4478 involves a sitting House member representing Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. Everyone in that room knew there was only one House member from Minnesota's 5th District, and she was sitting right there, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. This is outrageous. Omar's voice had risen an octave. You are using this hearing to publicly smear me without any. Congresswoman. Kash's voice was still calm, still measured, which somehow made it worse. I am answering your questions. You asked for specifics about FBI investigations, and I am providing them. Would you like me to stop? The silence that followed was excruciating. Omar looked at her lawyer, who was shaking his head and mouthing the word stop, but half the progressive movement was watching. CNN was watching, MSNBC was watching, and she couldn't back down now without looking guilty. She took a breath and tried to gather herself. Fine, Director, let's talk specifics. You mentioned campaign expenditures, but campaign spending is legal. Hiring consultants is legal. So what exactly is the allegation here? And that was when Kash Patel opened the red folder completely. The allegation, Congresswoman, is that campaign funds were used for personal benefit, specifically that payments totaling $7 million to E Street Group, a firm owned by Tim Minette, were not for legitimate campaign services, but rather were. E Street Group provided digital strategy, fundraising, consulting, and travel logistics. Omar's composure was cracking now, her voice rising. Those are legitimate campaign expenses. This is a witch hunt based on my personal life, which is none of the FBI's business. Kash waited for her to finish, letting the room absorb her outburst. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and deadly. Congresswoman, you are absolutely right that your personal life is your own business. But when campaign funds are involved, it becomes the FEC's business, and when the amounts and patterns suggest potential fraud, it becomes the FBI's business. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. A timeline. May I walk through the evidence? Kash Patel had been an investigator for 20 years. He knew how to present evidence. Not in a data dump that overwhelmed people, but piece by piece, building a case brick by brick until the wall was too high to climb. Let's start with the basics, he said, his voice taking on the cadence of a professor giving a lecture. E Street Group, owned by Tim Minette, began receiving payments from your campaign in April 2018. Initial amount $15,000 per month, which is actually fairly standard for digital consulting work. He displayed the timeline on the screens throughout the room, simple, clean, and damning. April 2018, E Street payments begin at $15,000 per month. June 2018, multiple witnesses report seeing you and Mr. Minette together at social events, not campaign events, but restaurants and private gatherings. August 2018, payments to E Street increased to $64,000 per month. Omar was staring at the timeline like it might catch fire. November 2018, payments jumped to $180,000 per month. That is an election month, so let's put a pin in that. March 2019, Dr. Beth Jordan Minette files for divorce from Tim Minette. In her filing, she specifically cites her husband's affair with a named individual. He paused, letting that hang in the air. You, Congresswoman, she named you. That is a private matter. Omar's voice cracked slightly. That has nothing to do with. April 2019, Kash continued, his voice cutting through her objection like it wasn't even there. 1 month after the divorce filing becomes public, 1 month after the affair is national news, your campaign pays E Street Group $275,000. He looked up from the timeline. In a single month, Congresswoman, $250,000 in 1 month to the company owned by the man you were allegedly having an affair with. The room was riveted. This wasn't dry campaign finance law anymore. This was a story. And everyone loves a story. Now, I am not a campaign finance expert, Kash said, his tone almost conversational, but I did some research. I looked at comparable campaigns. AOC's campaign, similar district size, similar demographics, similar challenges, paid their digital consulting firm $47,000 for the entire 2018 election cycle. Entire cycle. You paid E Street $890,000 in the same period. He let that number land. That is 19 times more, Congresswoman, for a district with half the population of some others. So naturally I asked our forensic accountants, what did E Street Group do to earn 19 times the industry standard? Omar opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at her lawyer. He was scribbling frantically on a legal pad, but his face said he had no good answers. We couldn't find documentation of services rendered, Kash continued. Your FEC filings list the payments as digital consulting and travel expenses. Very vague, very general. So we dug deeper. He pulled out another document, this one having numbers highlighted in yellow. In April 2019, that $275,000 a month, we traced where the money actually went. E Street Group received the payment from your campaign. They then made the following disbursements. $18,000 to Sterling Crisis Communications, that is a real crisis management firm here in D.C., professional outfit, very good at making scandals go away. He looked up at her. But that is only $18,000 out of $275,000. Where did the other $257,000 go? The silence was crushing, and every camera in the room was locked on Omar's face as she looked like she wanted to disappear. "Let me help you," Kash said, his voice almost gentle now, almost kind, which made it so much worse. Our forensic accountants traced the wire transfers. $100,000 went to an LLC registered in Tim Mynette's personal name, separate from E Street Group, just his name. $75,000 went to a luxury travel company, and the dates of travel match Instagram posts from Mr. Mynette's private account showing a 3-week vacation to the Maldives. He paused for effect. And $50,000 went to a residential real estate escrow company as a down payment on a townhouse in Georgetown, a townhouse that, according to D.C. property records, is currently owned jointly by you and Tim Mynette. You could have heard a pin drop. So let me ask you again, Congresswoman. Were any of those expenditures the $100,000 personal payment, the $75,000 Maldives vacation, the $50,000 house down payment, were any of those related to campaign activities? Omar's lawyer was on his feet. "Mr. Chairman, I need to confer with my client." "Sit down, Counselor," Chairman Johnson said firmly. "Your client called this hearing. Director Patel is answering her questions." The lawyer sat, and Omar looked at him desperately, but he shook his head. There was no good answer here. Omar's voice was barely audible. "I would need to review those specific transactions with my legal team before I could." "That is your right," Kash said. "But just to be clear for the record, you cannot currently explain where $257,000 in campaign funds went in April 2019, funds that were supposed to be used for your re-election campaign, but instead seemed to have been used for a personal payment, a vacation, and a house down payment." Another pause. Then so quiet the microphones barely caught it. "Not without reviewing the full documentation." Kash nodded slowly, like a teacher acknowledging a student who had just admitted they didn't do the homework. "Thank you for that answer, Congresswoman, but I am afraid the pattern doesn't stop there." You could see it on Omar's face now. The realization that this wasn't just about one payment. This was systematic. This was a pattern. And Kash Patel had all of it documented. "Let's talk about your tax returns," Kash said, pulling out yet another document from his seemingly bottomless folder. A Democrat on the committee, Jerry Nadler, leaned forward. "Mr. Chairman, I object. The director is now discussing personal tax information, which should not be. It is not personal when it involves potential federal crimes," Kash said calmly. "And Congresswoman Omar's federal tax returns from 2014 and 2015 are relevant to this investigation." He looked at Omar. "In 2014, you filed jointly with Ahmed Hirsi, married filing jointly status. You listed a residential address in Minneapolis and claimed 3 dependents. Standard stuff." Pause. "But according to Minnesota state marriage records, you were also legally married to Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi during that period. Your marriage to Mr. Elmi was registered with the state in 2009 and wasn't dissolved until 2017. Omar's face went from pale to ashen. "So, help me understand this, Congresswoman. How did you file joint federal tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi while you were legally married to Ahmed Elmi? It was a cultural marriage." "Not illegal," Omar stammered. Kash held up a piece of paper. "I am holding Minnesota State Marriage Certificate MC 200-901-7854. Bride Ilhan Abdullahi Omar. Groom Ahmed Noor. Said Elmi. Date February 12, 2009. Officiant signature. Witness signatures. State seal. This is a legal document filed with the state of Minnesota. He set it down gently on the table. So, if this marriage certificate is legitimate, then your 2014 tax return filed jointly with a different man would constitute filing false tax returns. That is a federal crime, Congresswoman. If this marriage certificate is fraudulent, then we have a different problem. Which is it? Omar looked at her lawyer. He was no longer taking notes, just sitting there, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. The situation was complicated, Omar said weakly. It was a cultural practice that the IRS doesn't recognize. Complicated or cultural practices aren't legal categories, Kash said, his voice still maddeningly calm. You are either married or you are not under federal law. And if you filed taxes claiming marriage to one person while legally married to another, that is perjury, that is making false statements to the federal government, and that carries a penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison. He leaned back slightly. And before you say this has been debunked, I have heard that talking point. Let me be clear. We have the marriage certificate. We have the tax returns. We have utility bills showing Mr. Does It time. Elmi living at the address you listed on your tax return. We have witness statements. This isn't a conspiracy theory. These are documents. A Republican member, James Comer, jumped in. Director, is the IRS investigating this matter? The IRS Criminal Investigation Division opened a case in 2021. Kash confirmed. The FBI is assisting because there are related immigration concerns. Immigration? Comer pressed. Kash hesitated for just a moment, then said, Congressman, I probably shouldn't go into detail on that without DOJ sign-off, but since Congresswoman Omar opened this door, he looked at Omar, who was no longer meeting his eyes. Our investigation found that Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi applied for U.S. permanent residency status in 2011. On his application, he listed Ilhan Omar as his spouse, and the marriage certificate I just referenced was submitted as supporting documentation. His application was approved. He let that sit for a moment. The concern, and I want to be clear, this is still under investigation, the concern is that if you married Mr. Elmi solely to assist with his immigration status while maintaining a concurrent relationship with Ahmed Hirsi, with whom you already had children, that would constitute immigration fraud. These allegations have been investigated. Omar's voice was desperate now. Local media did reporting, Kash agreed. The FBI does investigations. There is a difference. We have subpoena power. We have forensic accountants. We have the ability to trace financial records, phone records, residence records. He pulled out another document. We interviewed 12 witnesses who knew you during the 2009 to 2017 period. 11 of them stated that you never cohabitated with Ahmed Elmi as spouses. 8 of them stated that you maintained a romantic relationship with Ahmed Hirsi throughout the period of your legal marriage to Elmi, and 3 of them stated that you explicitly told them the marriage was to help Elmi get his papers. Omar sat frozen. Her lawyer had his head in his hands now. Congresswoman, I am not here to make accusations. I am here to answer your question. What crimes does the FBI investigate when it involves sitting members of Congress? The answer is the same crimes we investigate for anyone else. Tax fraud, immigration fraud, campaign finance fraud. We don't care if you are a congresswoman or a convenience store clerk. The law applies equally. But Kash Patel wasn't done, not even close. There is one more area I need to address, he said, pulling out a thinner folder. This one marked with a different classification level, requiring additional clearance from DOJ, which he had received that morning. He opened it carefully. In October 2017, you traveled to Istanbul, Turkey. While there, you met with officials from the Qatari government, specifically representatives from the Qatari embassy and the Qatar Foundation. Omar's eyes widened. I meet with foreign officials all the time. That is part of my job as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Absolutely correct, Kash agreed. Members of Congress meet with foreign officials regularly. That is normal. That is appropriate. Pause. But here is what caught our attention. Within 6 months of those meetings, you became very publicly critical of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which, again, is your right. But you were notably silent on Qatar's human rights record, despite Qatar having many of the same issues. I speak out where I think it is appropriate, and that is fine, but then in 2018, 2019, and 2020, your campaign received $187,000 in donations from individuals and entities with documented business ties to Qatari interests. He pulled out a list. I won't read all the names, but they are in your folder. Page 22. Donors with direct business relationships with Qatar Airways, Qatar Foundation subsidiaries, and Qatari sovereign wealth fund entities. Omar was flipping frantically through her folder now. Receiving donations is legal. Meeting with foreign officials is legal. Having policy positions favorable to certain countries is legal. But there is a law called the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA. It requires anyone who acts as an agent of a foreign government to register with the Justice Department. He looked directly at her. Did you register as a foreign agent, Congresswoman? I am not a foreign agent. I am a United States Congresswoman. The two aren't mutually exclusive, Kash said calmly. If you advocated for policy positions favorable to Qatar in exchange for financial support, either to your campaign or to affiliated organizations, that requires FARA registration. I never received any personal payments from. I didn't say personal payments, I said campaign donations and affiliated organizations. The law covers both. He pulled out his phone and set it on the table. The FBI obtained, through a lawfully executed warrant approved by a federal judge, WhatsApp messages between you and an intermediary. The intermediary's name is redacted in your folder, but I can tell you he is a Qatari national with ties to the government. Omar had stopped breathing. I can't read the messages verbatim without additional DOJ clearance, but I can summarize the content. The messages discuss, and I quote the summary, compensation for advocacy on Gulf policy issues and ensuring favorable congressional stance on Qatar's sanctions vote. He looked up. Congresswoman, would you like to explain what compensation for advocacy means in this context? The room was dead silent. Every eye was on Omar, and the cameras were so close you could see the sweat on her forehead. She turned to her lawyer, whispered frantically. He whispered back. She shook her head. He grabbed her arm and whispered more urgently. And finally she turned back to the microphone. I need to see the actual messages before I can respond to. They are in your folder, Kash repeated. Page 47. The relevant passages are highlighted. Omar flipped to page 47 with shaking hands and started reading. Her face went from ashen to white. The silence stretched on. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Chairman Johnson leaned into his microphone. Congresswoman Omar, do you need a moment to consult with your attorney? She didn't answer, just kept staring at the page. Congresswoman? Finally, barely audible. I need to consult with my attorney. That is your right, Kash said, his voice almost gentle now. But I need to ask for the record. Are you invoking your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination regarding the questions about potential FARA violations? And there it was, the moment. 11:47 a.m. The frozen second, where everything collapsed. Every person in that room knew what pleading the Fifth meant. Legally, it was a constitutional right. Everyone had it. But politically, in the court of public opinion, pleading the Fifth looked like an admission of guilt. Omar looked at her lawyer one more time. He nodded, reluctantly. She took a shaky breath. On advice of counsel, regarding the questions about the Qatar meetings and the Farah allegations. Yes, I am invoking my Fifth Amendment rights. The room exploded. Journalists sprinting for the doors. Republicans shouting, "She's pleading the Fifth." Democrats calling for recess. Cameras flashing like strobe lights. Twitter servers catching fire from the volume of tweets. Chairman Johnson banging his gavel so hard it sounded like gunshots. Order! Order! But there was no order. This was chaos. Beautiful, terrible, inevitable chaos. Kash Patel sat quietly at the witness table, closed his red folder, folded his hands, and waited for the room to settle. He looked almost sad, like a surgeon who had just had to deliver bad news to a patient, having done what needed to be done but taking no joy in it. When the room finally quieted enough for him to be heard, he leaned into the microphone one last time. "Congresswoman, I want to be clear. Invoking your Fifth Amendment rights is completely legal and proper. It is a constitutional protection we all have, and there should be no stigma attached to exercising it." He paused. "But I need to inform you as a courtesy that the Department of Justice has been monitoring this hearing. Based on your invocation of the Fifth Amendment, in response to questions about potential FARA violations, they will likely request an expedited review of all aspects of case file 2021-DC-4478. Another pause, this one longer. "I have no further information to provide at this time." He sat back. The hearing was over, and everyone knew it. Even Omar knew it. Chairman Johnson looked around the room, saw the chaos, and made the only decision he could. "This hearing is in recess, pending consultation with committee counsel. We will reconvene at a time to be determined." The gavel fell, and with it, Ilhan Omar's career. The next 60 minutes were a blur. Omar left the hearing room immediately, surrounded by lawyers and staffers forming a human shield, offering no statement and no comments to the press waiting outside, engaging in just a desperate sprint to the underground parking garage and a black SUV with tinted windows. But the damage was done. Within minutes, clips were everywhere. The moment she pleaded the Fifth, the look on her face when Kash mentioned the WhatsApp messages, the $275,000 payment, the two husbands, all of it packaged into bite-sized pieces, perfect for social media consumption. By 1 p.m., Omar indictment was trending #1 worldwide, Kash Patel was #2, and Plead the Fifth was #3. CNN broke into regular programming with breaking news. In an explosive House oversight hearing, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar invoked her Fifth Amendment rights when questioned by FBI Director Kash Patel about potential violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Fox News was more direct. Omar pleads the Fifth. FBI reveals multi-front investigation into progressive Congresswoman. Even MSNBC, which had been sympathetic to Omar for years, struggled with the optics. While the Fifth Amendment is a constitutional right and should not be seen as an admission of guilt, today's hearing raised serious questions that will likely dog Congresswoman Omar for the foreseeable future. The clips got millions of views in the first hour. The still frame of Omar's face at 11:47 a.m. Eyes wide, face pale, the moment of realization, became an instant meme captioned, "When you demand transparency and get it, or point of view, you played yourself, or task, failed successfully." The political world moved fast, always had, but this was something else. This was a career ending in real time in front of the entire world. By 3 p.m., Omar's office released a statement that was exactly what you would expect. Today's hearing was a politically motivated ambush designed to silence a black Muslim woman who dares to speak truth to power. Director Patel's tactics were shameful, and his allegations are baseless. "I will continue to fight for my constituents and for progressive values." But it landed flat. Even sympathetic outlets noted that she had demanded the hearing. She had called Kash Patel to testify. She had asked for transparency, and she had gotten it. Nancy Pelosi's office was asked for comment, and the response was careful, diplomatic, and notably lacking in any actual defense of Omar. The Speaker believes all members deserve due process. She will have no further comment on ongoing investigations. Translation: You are on your own. The Progressive Caucus put out a statement that was somehow even weaker. We believe in the presumption of innocence and due process for all members of Congress. Not a single mention of Omar by name. But it was the silence from the squad that spoke loudest. AOC tweeted once, "Due process matters for everyone." And that was it. Rashida Tlaib retweeted it and added, "Standing with all who face persecution, generic, safe, non-committal." Nobody wanted to get too close to this fire. The next 48 hours saw the complete collapse of Ilhan Omar's political standing. On day 2, The Washington Post published a deep dive titled, "The Case Against Omar: How a Routine Hearing Became a Political Catastrophe." An article that didn't take sides, didn't need to, just laid out the timeline, the evidence Kash had presented, and Omar's inability to answer basic questions about her own campaign finances. The New York Times followed with, "When Transparency Backfires: How Ilhan Omar's Strategy Destroyed Her Defense," which was more analytical, examining the political miscalculation of demanding a public hearing without knowing what evidence the FBI actually had. The Wall Street Journal op-ed page was brutal. The problem with demanding that others live by rules you don't follow yourself is that eventually someone calls your bluff. Yesterday, Kash Patel called Ilhan Omar's bluff. She folded. But the real damage came from within her own party. 3 Democratic senators, privately off the record to Politico, suggested that Omar should consider stepping aside from her committee assignments pending the outcome of these investigations. The names leaked within 6 hours: Chris Coons, Mark Warner, and John Tester, moderates from swing states who were already worried about Republican attack ads and wanted distance fast. By day 3, the House Ethics Committee announced a preliminary review of the allegations. Republican leadership called for her immediate removal from all committees. The vote came faster than anyone expected. Thursday afternoon, just 5 days after the hearing, the House voted 312 to 119 to remove Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee pending resolution of legal matters. 67 Democrats voted yes, and that number told the whole story. When 67 members of your own party vote to sideline you, the career is over, regardless of what happens in court. Omar watched the vote from her office, didn't attend the floor session, and issued a brief statement calling it a dark day for democracy. But even her most loyal supporters were quiet. The evidence was too damning, the optics were too bad, and the Fifth Amendment invocation, legally justified or not, looked like exactly what everyone feared it was: an admission. The photo that went viral captured it all. It was a still frame from C-SPAN, taken at exactly 11:47 a.m. On the day of the hearing, Omar's face frozen in that moment of realization, mouth slightly open, eyes wide. The split second when she understood that this wasn't going the way she had planned, that this wasn't a hearing, this was her trial, and she had walked into it willingly. The image became the defining visual of the entire scandal. Late-night comedians used it, political cartoonists referenced it, and it showed up in attack ads in swing districts across the country. When Democrats demand transparency, the ad would say, showing the photo, sometimes they get it. 3 weeks after the hearing, more shoes dropped. The Department of Justice held a brief press conference where the Attorney General, flanked by the U.S. Attorney for D.C., made a short statement. After reviewing evidence presented in the House Oversight Committee hearing on March 15th, as well as additional evidence gathered by the FBI over the past 18 months, the Department of Justice has obtained indictments from a federal grand jury on multiple counts. He read from a prepared statement. 12 counts of wire fraud related to campaign finance violations, 18 counts of making false statements to the Federal Election Commission, 11 counts of filing false federal tax returns, 6 counts of conspiracy to commit immigration fraud, and 4 counts of failing to register as a foreign agent under FARA. 51 counts total. The defendant will be arraigned next Tuesday. Trial is tentatively set for September. We will have no further comment pending trial. The Attorney General didn't say Omar's name, didn't have to. Everyone knew. Omar's legal team released a statement claiming these charges were politically motivated and without merit, that they would vigorously defend against them and prove Congresswoman Omar's innocence, but by then, nobody was really listening. The political damage was done. The legal battle would take months or years, but the career was already over. 6 weeks after the hearing, the fallout was complete. A primary challenger emerged, a moderate Democrat, a former city councilwoman backed by a massive wave of donations from business groups and centrist PACs. Her announcement speech was carefully calibrated. I am running because Minnesota's 5th District deserves representation focused on their needs, not on defending against federal indictments. Polling showed Omar down 23 points in her own district among Democrats, in one of the bluest districts in America. Her campaign treasurer had already cut an immunity deal with DOJ, providing additional documents and testimony. 3 staffers resigned within 2 weeks. Major donors froze contributions, and the campaign went from raising millions to barely covering payroll. Tim Mynett's E Street Group was under IRS audit. He had hired his own legal team separate from Omar's, and word was he was negotiating his own deal with prosecutors. The book deal she had signed 2 years ago, a memoir about her journey from refugee camp to Congress, was quietly canceled, the publisher citing changed circumstances. The Netflix documentary about the squad was shelved indefinitely. And through it all, Kash Patel said nothing. He gave no interviews, made no statements, attended no victory laps on Fox News or conservative podcasts. He simply went back to work at FBI headquarters, running the bureau, investigating crimes, because to him, that is all this had ever been. An investigation, evidence, facts, the law applied equally. He hadn't destroyed Ilhan Omar's career. She had done that herself. He had just been the one holding up the mirror. 3 months after the hearing, I got a chance to sit down with someone who had been in the room that day, a senior staffer for one of the Republican committee members. We met at a coffee shop in Georgetown, and I asked the question everyone wanted answered. Did Kash know? Did he know she was going to walk into it? The staffer stirred their coffee for a long moment, then smiled. Let me tell you something about Kash Patel, they said. He has been doing this for 20 years. He was a prosecutor. He was a public defender. He was a national security official. He knows how investigations work. He knows how evidence works. And most importantly, he knows how people work. Another sip of coffee. When Omar demanded that hearing, when she subpoenaed him to testify publicly about FBI investigations into members of Congress, his team spent 2 weeks preparing. Not preparing defenses, preparing disclosures. They went to DOJ. They went to OGC. They got every piece of evidence cleared for public release. They built those red folders like they were building a legal brief. So he knew she would ask about investigations. He knew she would demand transparency. And he knew that if you demand transparency, you better be ready to receive it. Omar thought transparency meant exposing Kash Patel. He understood that transparency cuts both ways. The staffer leaned back. She brought a narrative to a gunfight. He brought documents.